Hey there, welcome to Factually. I'm Adam Conover. Thank you for joining me on the show again. I don't know if you noticed, but we're living in an age where everybody feels like the world is ending, and not for bad reason. You know, we got climate change that we are doing less about than ever. There's the advent of AI. There's dawning fascism around the world. Or if you yourself as a fascist, maybe the end of the world is day laborers standing around at a Home Depot parking lot. Whatever, no matter who you are, anyone can find a reason to believe that the end is nigh, right? I mean, even in casual conversation, people talk about the future as though it might not happen. They say, oh, such and such will happen if we still have a democracy by then, if we still have a country, if the world still even exists. There's even a name for a person who has given up on the very idea of a future, the doomer, this archetype that encapsulates these feelings of fatalism that all of us have. In other words, shit has gotten pretty bleak. We all recognize that we're not just in a single crisis, but a tangle of interlocking crises, the environmental, political, and economic crises that are shaping our world. So you could be forgiven for thinking that this is it and that everything is about to end. But here's the unfortunate fact we all have to face. The world is not actually going to end in total. You are going to have to get up tomorrow and enter the new world that is being created, just like every human has before you. And in fact, the world has ended many times before now. We have had apocalypse after apocalypse throughout history when one world ended and a new one began. And in fact, the world that we inherited, that we live in today, would not have existed if not for this happening over and over again. I'm not going to tell you that we're not living in apocalyptic times, but what I am going to tell you is that apocalypse doesn't mean the end of everything. It primarily means the birth of something new. And we are probably going to be a part of what that new world is. We are going to have to live in it. And therefore, we need to think about how other societies in the past, different people around the world, have lived through the great calamities that already happened to them and that created the world that we live in today. And if we do so, that might give us a better idea of what lies in wait for us on the other side of our own apocalypse. And that is what we are going to do today. My guest today is absolutely incredible. I know you are going to love this conversation. Before we get into it, I want to remind you, though, that if you want to support this show, you can do so on Patreon. $5 a month gets you every episode of our show ad-free. You can also join our online Discord community where we have awesome community features. We're doing a bi-monthly book club. We'd love to have you join us. Head to patreon.com/Adam Conover if you'd like to join. And if you'd like to come see me on the road, I am touring my new hour of stand-up comedy all around the country. Head to adamconover.net for all those tickets and tour dates. I'd love to give you a hug in the meet and greet line that I do after every single show. And now let's get to this week's episode. My guest today is Lizzie Wade. She's a science writer and she's the author of the new book, Apocalypse: How Catastrophe Transformed Our World and Can Forge New Futures. I know you're going to love this conversation. Please welcome Lizzie Wade. Lizzie, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So why do you think that at this moment in American history, people have started talking about our current moment as though it's the end of the world or the end of the country, or started using these more apocalyptic terms? I mean, I grew up in the 90s. People weren't talking that way in the 90s.
Yeah, me too. And I think, people are talking like it, I think, because, to be perfectly honest and scary, is like it could happen. And it has happened in the past. And
wait. Hold on. Those two statements are in conflict. You say, I'm like, why do people feel like it's the end of the world? You're like, could happen. World could end. And it's happened before. So hold on a second. If the world's ended before, what the fuck are we doing here? What do you mean?
I mean, that's a great question. I think that's part of what my book tries to answer. But I think, that many, many people in the past, throughout, the 40,000 years of human history, at least that my book covers, have felt these exact same feelings. And, that the world that they knew, that they live in, that they were used to, that they thought would continue for the rest of their lives, suddenly starts coming apart around them. And that could be for many reasons. Climate change is a big one, but usually not the only one. Societal collapse comes for, come for kind of every society before the ones we know today. So in some senses, it's not an unusual or uncommon experience for people to have gone through. And I think, when I started out writing this book, I sort of felt like, oh, one of the things that will be unique about our time is how like aware we are. Like I sort of imagined these apocalyptic events taking people in the past more by surprise because, they didn't have like the internet and 24-hour global news, and they weren't able to be aware of things on the other side of the world immediately the way that we are. But I think actually one of the things I learned and concluded was that these feelings that we're feeling now, that something is happening and we're not sure what or where it's going next, are things that people have felt throughout so many societies and so many points in human history.
But the argument that I have often heard before is, hey, people have always felt like the world is going to end, therefore it isn't. And there's some truth to that. You always wake up and have to deal with tomorrow. Like, and the lust for an apocalypse is in some way, just part of the, I think, innate human thirst for death. That, hey, if there's an apocalypse, it means I don't have to go to work tomorrow. It means what I do right now doesn't matter. It means I can get stoned and play Donkey Kong because there's no world tomorrow. And the unfortunate truth is, if I get stoned and play Donkey Kong until 5 a.m., I am in fact screwing myself tomorrow because I do have work to do, because I do have a rent to pay, and that is not going to change. And the same is true of climate change and any other problem that we have, where in fact, unfortunately, there will be a world. And so normally we use this historical argument, a same as it ever was argument, right? That's what I call these, is usually meant to tamp down despair and freaking out. Oh, don't worry so much. This is just same as it ever was. But you're kind of making a different argument. You're saying people in the past thought the world would end, and it did for them in a sense, and it may for us, but we should conceive of the end of the world differently than we commonly do. Is that the argument?
Yes, I think so. I think for me, looking at, the end, I don't think that the statements, the world is ending and the statement, there's always a future, are incompatible. I actually think they're kind of the same statement. Like there always will be a future. And sort of having to confront what that future is going to be. Like the end of the world also means the beginning of a new one, and actually living in these moments like the one we do right now, like the ones the people, in many cultures over, long spans of human history lived through in the past. Like these are the moments, these are not the moments where people give up. These are the moments where people have to be the most engaged, the most thoughtful, the most creative, the most forward thinking. And, that's how these new worlds get created out of the world that is, the past world that's being destroyed.
Okay, that's the incredible adjustment you're making to our normal dialogue about apocalypse. Because instead of saying the world is ending, the end, blackness, it's over, everything has ceased, you're saying the end of the world always means the birth of a new one. And guess what? You're going to be alive for both, probably.
Probably not. I don't think you and I will get to the end of this story. Like, I think people very rarely live through the whole sweep of the process. But I think, people who know us might, grandchildren might. And I think that, kind of reconceiving of the end of the world as the beginning of the world. And actually the ends of these worlds, are often kind of the best or only chance that societies really get to change on a truly fundamental and very radical level. And sometimes those changes are not, often those changes are not fun to live through. I'm not arguing that they're desirable exactly, but I do think they're full of opportunities. And the more like conscious we can be that we're living in a moment, not of kind of increasing, and not of diminishing opportunities, but of just like exploding opportunities, I think is like, it makes me feel more, not in control of the event, but it makes me feel like my decisions matter a little bit more. And this is a really interesting moment to be living through, and like one that's really full of opportunity.
Right. The end of the world, the beginning of a new one, is a moment not of less opportunity, but of more, because something new is being created and there's new possibilities that did not exist back then. Let's get concrete and talk about some of the past ends of the worlds that there have been. You write about the Black Death, about colonialism. I'm also imagining like revolutions, like the French Revolution is the death of one world, if you're a French monarchist, and the birth of a new one, right? And then, of course, the Napoleonic transition years later. Where should we start? Let's start with the Black Death. How did the Black Death transform society, end one world and begin another?
Yeah, great. Like that was one of the ones that was, most terrifying to imagine, even as I was writing this book during COVID. So it sort of seemed both more relatable and is just absolutely unrelatable and unimaginable, the scale of death and destruction that people lived through in a really short span of time. I mean, it took 5 years for the whole thing to be over in Eurasia. And if you lived in a city, it would come through in 12 to 18 months. And half of the people that you ever met would have been dead or more.
Wow.
And
you're living in a place, you're living in a city, London, any other European city, and the plague rolls through, and 18 months later, half of the people in the city are dead.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I thought, this was one of the ones that I was like, oh, well, there's no way they could have known it was coming. Like when I thought about my experience, sort of knowing in those months before COVID hit where I live, and, in Mexico, where it's, hit kind of March 2020 as well, and sort of knowing that something was happening, waiting for it, knowing that it wasn't quite here, thinking, will I know when it has started, all of that kind of liminal time. I think people in a lot of cities in Europe actually felt that way too, especially once you get like a little away from the Mediterranean up to London, where, it kind of came for the trading cities of Italy first and kind of around the Mediterranean and kind of worked its way north. And so London, by the time it hit there, they would have known exactly what had happened in Florence and what had happened in Marseille.
Wow.
And, they would have, and they actually prepared by building these huge mass graves, basically, like before the plague hit, because they basically knew that was the only thing that they could do.
Wow. So they were like, the plague is coming, not let's try to stop it because we have no way to do that. But hey, in other cities, they ran out of grave sites. So at the very least, let's dig some big fucking holes.
Yeah, basically.
Jesus
and,
Christ.
At the time it was like all of it was processed as a very religious experience, like, because that's how people, that was sort of the framework that people lived their lives. So
Right.
being able to bury people in hollowed ground, I guess, and like save their souls was really important. So like being able to prepare for a proper burial was like extremely, extremely important, and as you say, it was sort of beyond their reach to actually stop the people from dying, but they could do something within their worldview that did seem really vital, and they did. And so those graves now hold, all over Europe, really, like when you can identify a plague. Sometimes they're called plague pits, which is a little, I think, disrespectful for the amount of planning and effort that actually went into these things.
Hey, buddy, it's not a pit, all right. This is a grave. It's got sides. It's got a bottom. It was built by a professional. Anyone can build a pit. Only I can build a grave. That's what
they weren't just like tossing people in here. I mean,
sorry that my London gravedigger had a Brooklyn accent. It's the only one I can do. So for the Black Death to be the end of a world, I can only imagine the number of dimensions that would mean. The end of a social world, the end of certainly, I would imagine how much that would affect the economic system. If you're working in any particular business and half of all people die, that's half of your customers, it's half of your, your suppliers. I mean, it's to have that amount of people die all at once would be devastating for any society. It would change the way of life in every possible way. What are some examples?
Yeah. So when you look at, when people, because the scale of death was so massive and rapid, certainly people living through it who would write it down kind of experience this as like it could take anybody at any time, kind of random, indiscriminate. But when bioarchaeologists have actually looked at the people buried in these graves, particularly in London, which England had suffered through a century of famines and crop shortages, and kind of there was like a livestock disease like beforehand that was really devastating for the food supply. And when you look at the skeletons of people who are buried in these plague mass graves, you can see that they tend to be the most vulnerable people in a society. So people who had previously suffered malnutrition, who have all these like signs of other diseases that they'd suffered through their lives. And those tended to be the people more likely to die in the Black Death. And so extrapolating a little from that, you can sort of see like, okay, this was a very unequal feudal society where, I think there's economic studies of kind of the wealth distribution, and it's just shocking. I mean, it's even, I'm not going to say it's worse than we are today, but it's up there.
I mean, maybe not numerically, but there were probably more people living in just abject filth,
yes,
I would imagine.
And they really didn't have any choice in their lives. You're born into a certain social status, not even a certain social status. You're born into a certain place, and that is the place that you have to work until you die. I mean, peasants had no choice in where they lived, where they moved, where they worked, who they worked for, what they got paid, what they were able to afford to eat, like nothing. It was very, it was very limiting and very limited, and it just became harder and harder over that century that led up to the plague, which kind of set the stage for all of these vulnerable people being hit by what wasn't by any accounts a devastating disease. And so it does seem that, more what we would call today working class people, although of course it was, they had different conceptions of this and words for it. Far more of them died than kind of the nobility. I think there's only like one member of the English royal family who dies in the plague, and it's because like she's on a trip to Spain or something.
I mean, it is impossible not to compare what you've just said to COVID when you're describing it. In my mind, you're describing essential workers working at grocery stores because they've been deemed essential, but not being provided masks and dying in larger numbers than laptop workers like myself who got to stay inside and order grocery delivery. Those disparities are certainly still with us, but it sounds like they were perhaps magnified in some ways then. Also, the Black Death was many orders of magnitude more deadly than COVID even.
Yes, many, many. I don't want to, there were certainly like completely haunting comparisons as I was writing this throughout that time. But, I still think that imagining what that was like beyond what I can conceive of. I mean, it must have just been horrific. I mean, the psychological toll alone must have been extreme, and you can only sort of see that in kind of obliquely through some written accounts, mostly by, again, like religious figures like priests and people in monasteries. But the transformation really happens though after the Black Death, when so many people have died, so many, again, what who we would call essential workers have died, and there's nobody left to do the work of keeping these manors running, keeping these society running, do the farming, tend to the livestock, make the food, harvest the grain. And, all of the people who, the way that we can see this is the elites writing down their experiences. And to them, this seems absolutely horrifying. It's like the world has turned upside down. All these people have power that never should have power. Why are they determining what they want to do and how much they want to work and how much they want to get paid? And, obviously this opens the door. You can see a lot more social mobility. A lot of times you can only see this in the ways that the kind of elite social structure was reacting in kind of a backlash way. So they were passing laws for decades after the Black Death, trying to get people to stay where they were born, accept the wages, the pre-plague wages, go back to the way things were. And, I think that backlash did have some power to, constrict people's lives in a certain way again. But just like the length of time that went on, to me, like, I mean, it was decades after the plague had been fully done, and probably most of the people affected by at least the later laws were not even alive when the plague had happened. And to just like see those social shockwaves reverberating through the society and people just refusing to go back to the way things were before, despite trying, the elite class trying to force them to. I mean, it was quite chilling, actually, the parallels.
Wow, right. The parallel to the post-COVID moment where workers are used to working from home, or the labor market is tighter and they're saying, pay me more, I'm going to go where I want. And then seeing the bosses say, go back to the office and that sort of thing. That basically the gentry of Europe, where I doth proclaim all workers must work in the field. Better synergies come into play when we can see each other face to face, like as you pick my rutabagas or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But did it lead to more lasting social changes in Europe? Like, obviously, there was some decades of tumult as in a reshuffling of social hierarchies. But did this lead to any broader breakup or disruption of what was a really strict social hierarchy in most places until then?
Yeah, interestingly, like the social hierarchy did kind of like reestablish itself. I think there are other people who have made the argument that this was kind of like set the stages for, capitalism to arise, and kind of this, this sense that like labor was connected to, it wasn't just like birthright. It was like things you had a choice over it. And I think that there is probably some truth to that, although it took a long time for societies to really change. And I think other people have argued that, you don't see, for example, like a societal or political collapse of the European system, like many of the countries, or at least cities that experienced this plague are like the same cities speaking the same languages as we do today. And like many of the other examples in the book, that wouldn't be the case. Like there is a surprising amount of continuity. And some of that's because society was really kind of atomized in the first place. Like it was kind of based around these manners. And so like, even though people were moving around more, like the larger structure of it was kind of adaptable. There's also some people argue that it just happened so quickly that it didn't really it's hard to do a political revolution if everybody is dead, and so I think the psychological toll was really huge. But you can see for several centuries, actually, the most interesting thing to me is like that the lives of the most marginalized people in, at least around London, which is where these studies have been done, their health was a lot better in the centuries after the plague, and it had been very poor in the century leading up to it, which made the plague worse. And in the century after, there's less malnutrition, people are taller. There's kind of this, bioarchaeologists always look for this kind of lines on people's teeth that indicate kind of a interruption in the growth during childhood, and which speaks to like some kind of major physiological stress. People have less of that, and it just seems like it was a lot more pleasant. Like the lives of even the poorest people in England, at least, were a lot more pleasant and a lot more equal. Like actually inequality really falls. It like plummets in the decades after the Black Death. Like that's from data from Italy. So you can sort of see this like even though the structure of society didn't change, people were kind of like coming onto a similar level in terms of their health and their wealth, and maybe not like power exactly, like political power, but it really did have, and it wasn't like, that didn't in any way make the plague like worth it or like not such a bad thing. I mean, I don't think anyone who lived through it would have ever said that, and I don't think they should. It's
Are
just
you worried
like,
you're gonna? You got to really watch out, because people who are still touchy about the Black Plague are all over the place. If you hint that the Black Plague was maybe a good thing, they're gonna be jumping down your throat.
I don't, who knows? Like I think there's a sense that like there is a growing sense that these diseases can take out the people who, the weak among us, and I think I think it is the very social structures that, that make these inequalities so deadly are, the ones that are setting you up to die of COVID or to die of the Black Death. I mean, it's nothing about people's moral good or even like physical fitness in a vacuum.
But there are people pushing the ideology that death from sickness is a moral failing, and that these kill only the people who deserve it, and that the strong of us will survive. There are people in real life now, and I presume then, who were saying that. Folks, this week's episode is brought to you by Alma. I cannot tell you how many times I've encountered people who think that they are dispensing and or receiving real mental health advice on social media. Worse yet, it seems like there is a growing number of people who are turning to AI chatbots because they assume that a real therapist is just too expensive or out of reach for them. You know, in my own mental health journey, it would have helped me so much to know how easy it actually is to access real mental health care, affordable mental health care, quality mental health care, care that is provided by a real person with a real connection to you, someone who actually cares and wants to understand what is going on with you. That is why if you're on your own journey of mental health, I recommend taking a look at Alma. They make it easy to connect with an experienced therapist, an actual licensed therapist. And on top of that, a real person who can listen, understand, and support you through whatever challenges you're facing. Doesn't that sound better than talking to some algorithm when you're trying to solve your problems? Talking to a real therapist. And I swear to you, that is not out of reach. 99% of Alma therapists accept insurance, including United, Aetna, Cigna, and more. And there are no surprises. You'll always know what your sessions will cost up front with Alma's cost estimator tool. With the help of an actual therapist who understands you, you can start seeing real improvements in your mental health. Better with people, better with Alma. Visit helloalma.com/factually to get started and schedule a free consultation today. That's helloalma.com/factually. You know, life's been a little crazy for me lately. I've been bouncing around all over the place, heading from town to town, on the road, doing stand-up across the country. And all that travel can make me feel really edgy, you know? By the time I get to my hotel, I'm so wound up, I don't even know how to relax. But you know one thing I found that helps me unwind? Cornbread Hemp's CBD gummies. Cornbread Hemp CBD gummies are made to help you feel better, whether it's stress, discomfort, or you just need a little relaxation. After a long day, it could be just what you need to help let the stress of everyday life evaporate as you sink into your favorite big cushy chair. Cornbread Hemp only uses the best part of the hemp plant, the flower, for the purest and most potent CBD. And I swear you can taste the quality in it, which isn't really the case with other gummies. But most importantly, you can feel that these are well-made gummies. Cornbread Hemp gummies have become my go-to, and I'm sure they'll be yours as well. And get this, right now, Factually listeners can save 30% on their first order. Just head to cornbreadhemp.com/factually and use code Factually at checkout. That's cornbreadhemp.com/factually, promo code Factually. So, I'm curious, how did then, the death of one world brings a new one into being? What was the way that people were sort of able to seize that new world at the time, if there was one?
Yeah, I think like people were, I think in people's like very personal lives, individual lives, something I could see in these documents was that people were just moving around much more than before. Like, whereas before you'd be kind of like imprisoned on these manors, working in the same jobs your parents had, getting, not enough wages to pay for your food. You could say like, oh, well, I'm going over there. Like they're paying more over there. Like the work is not as onerous. Like there's more opportunities. That sense of like opportunity, I think probably really springs from this moment and leads to a lot of the other things. Although, I will say that this is not, there isn't like an immediate political collapse, which is surprising to me, actually. But
I'm imagining what it would be like to survive the Black Death. You're a peasant on some manor estate. The Lord tells you where you can and can't go, and then half of the people you work under and work around die. Suddenly the manor estate's in disarray. The Lord is dead. The butler is like, and you're like, well, I'm going to get the fuck out of here then. Like no one's, let me grab the key and leave, right? And, maybe I'll go next door. Maybe I'll go walking around. I mean, it would be apocalyptic. You'd maybe be walking through an eerily empty countryside like a character in Stephen King's The Stand, but like, it would cause you to move from one place to another. It causes the social order to be reshuffled and new opportunities to grow.
Yeah. In Italy, like a lot of the estates got broken up because like basically their inheritance laws, like it was like real chaos, right? As you say. And so like there was just like a lot more land available for purchase or for, different kinds of people to get their hands on in some way. And so like hereditary wealth gets really interrupted. And of course, like within the next few centuries, of which plague continues to recur in all of these places, the elites that do pass laws to kind of make that social disruption that happened after the Black Death, you don't see it in subsequent outbreaks of the plague. And that's a lot of because of how like the legal system changed in response to like the explosion of opportunities and sort of more comfortable lives that became possible for people who they didn't think should have those comfortable lives.
Wow. So Black Death rolls through, kills half of people, but for some peasants, they end up with a more comfortable life. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to another example. In what ways would you consider colonialism an apocalypse? I love this example. I want to hear you break it down.
Yeah. So this is one, that really comes from my experience living in Mexico City. I'm from California originally, but I've lived here for like 12 years. And I think colonialism for someone like me in the US is something that I'm encouraged not even to see or think about. And in Mexico City, it's much closer to the surface because of the history here with the invasion, the Spanish invasion and the war with the Aztec Empire is like the iconic, kind of birth of the country, speaking of end of one world, beginning of the new one, of the next one. And so, for one thing that makes colonialism an absolute apocalypse is the scale of death and destruction that it wreaks havoc for centuries on indigenous communities, not only indigenous communities, to be honest, like everyone was dying of disease at this time. And I think it's a little bit overstated that, indigenous Americans were simply like passive victims of these inevitable epidemics. And it sort of didn't matter what the Europeans did because these new diseases were going to kill everyone. I don't think that's true at all. I think these new diseases hit very often in conditions of just the very conditions that made people extremely vulnerable to the Black Death, right? Like being famine, oppression, economic marginalization, increasing racism as the centuries goes on. And, those are really far more determinative than the actual fact of a disease or no. And so, but, millions of people who, would not have died in an alternative world did die. And these cultures and communities are disrupted. I think in apocalypses, there is always a future, there is always a new world, and there was a future for these indigenous people and communities. They were not wiped out, they were not driven extinct. That's sort of a pernicious myth that many of us learn. But it was extremely destructive and devastating. But I think
it was an end of the previous world that they lived in. I mean, if you imagine being a member of any pre-contact civilization, any 1491 civilization, things are going one way. You're dealing with your own problems. You're worried about your own nation or empire's, concerns. And then some people show up in some boats and you're like, oh, who the fuck are these people? And then 10 years later, everything is completely different and it's never going back. Right? Like either you're at war or a disease has whipped its way through your community, or suddenly at the very least, there's new products and languages and, new people have whatever, new technologies now, new animal, new forms of livestock, new crops, new just the people who came on the boats are now, they've set up a colony somewhere. They're living there. It transforms a previous regime that I imagine would have been stable for a longer period before that. Suddenly there's massive amounts of change. Your old way of life is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the same actually could be said for Europe, maybe not in terms of the absolute devastation and violence that people in Europe faced, but, the New World was created for Europe too, like all these new foods, all these people were actually, tons of indigenous people went to Europe, both, by force and by choice. People from all over the world are mixing and meeting each other. Kind of, we think of globalization as something that began in the 1990s, but it was already happening by the 1590s, like it was like there were people from everywhere, all corners of the world meeting each other in Mexico City for the first time. Yeah. And like that moment where everything is kind of up for grabs in, that moment of kind of apocalyptic imagination and creation that is happening alongside and often because of the incredible destruction is, I think very poignant to me and very like a very pivotal moment to imagine, because of course the new world that is created out of that apocalypse is the world we live in now, and which is still a post-apocalyptic landscape kind of built from the rubble of this experience, and in ways that
Yeah.
I don't think we've really been taught, or at least people like me in the US have never really been taught to appreciate.
Yeah. And to the extent that we are taught to appreciate it, again, it's to see the people who inhabited the older world that ended as passive, right? As the Native American shedding a single tear, right? As the train rolls through, or the cowboys show up, or the litter, goes across the landscape, as opposed to people who are actively involved in creating the new world because they happen to still fucking live here and took a part in it, right? So what are some of those stories of how those folks, turned apocalypse? I was about to say turn apocalypse into opportunity. That's horrible, but that's a horrible framing that I really shouldn't have said. But to your point of, there's a new world being birthed that everybody participates in. What are some examples of that?
Everybody is participating in this, and I think the myths that I am hoping to kind of challenge in this book is that this was, that there was sort of one side of this experience that was making the changes, and the other side of this experience who was just suffering and dying. And the other myth is that suffering and dying was inevitable. And I don't think anything that happened was inevitable. I mean, nothing in history is ever inevitable. It just seems that way. And 500 years later in the world, that moment that grows out of that world. But going back to the beginning,
sometimes it seems that way in the present. Sometimes people in the present say, "Well, what's happening right now is inevitable. I can't stop progress," and inevitability is fake.
Yeah, I think inevitability is totally fake, and that sense that human history is this trajectory of linear progress, and we've gone up and up and up and up, and now we're at the top, and now the only place we have to go is down, is I think like a really limiting and damaging way of viewing ourselves and our history and our future. But anyway, going back to the people who actually participated in this colonial apocalypse. So, I focus on the story of Mexico City, which is one that's close to my heart since I live here, but also I think does set the stage in many ways for many of the myths we have received about this event and this experience. And essentially, I think that one of the things we tend to learn about colonialism, and maybe one of the reasons why we don't tend to see it as apocalyptic, is like we sort of think that the Europeans are in control of it in some sense, and kind of they're the ones making all the decisions. They're the ones kind of pushing things forward or not. And I think when you look at the Spanish Aztec War, which I think, usually gets called the conquest of Mexico. And, I think it really should be sort of referred to as the Spanish Aztec War, or you could even call it the Tlaxcalteca Mexica War, because basically what happened was when the European invaders arrived, they kind of walked into this political landscape that I think you could argue that they never fully tried to understand or never really understood. But basically you had an imperial power based in Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City, the Mexica, who we now call the Aztecs, and, who controlled much of what is now like kind of southern Mexico today, central and southern Mexico. And, they were not, the indigenous conceptions, or at least Mexica conceptions of empire, weren't really about territorial control or kind of cultural imposition or conquest. Like it was more about tribute and taxation and kind of having access to the kind of the luxury goods that these places would produce. And, it all kind of fed back into making Tenochtitlan like one of the greatest cities the world has ever seen, probably. I mean, it was even the Spaniards who arrived are always talking about how it looks like something out of a dream, and it's so clean and like beautiful, and it floats on this lake, and it's just so fantastic. And, but of course, because the Mexica were an imperial power, there's always resistance to imperial power. And one of the main forces of resistance was this republic just slightly to the east over the mountains called Tlaxcala, and which is now the Mexican state of Tlaxcala. And sort of the determining factor in the fate of the Aztec Empire and the success of what we think of as the Spanish invasion is not like the arrival of the Spanish or the horses or the guns or even the diseases. It's the Tlaxcaltecas' decision to ally with the Spanish. And, there were thousands and thousands of indigenous warriors who fought in this battle on both sides, of course. But like kind of the political maneuverings of this long history, like I really tried to see this moment not as like it was a moment of a long and continuous indigenous history and indigenous relationships that Europeans and Africans also just kind of also happen to be around for, and like that, and obviously the consequences of that decision, they could never have predicted them. Like they could never have seen that far into the future. But also like our ideas about like even our racial categories, like thinking of people as European people, African people, indigenous people, like those were not relevant categories to anyone at that time. Like even, the Europeans came from all these different countries. Africans would have come from tons of different communities and countries, and indigenous people did not see themselves as like one passive mass of people, like versus the Europeans. It was much more complex, much more complicated, much more nuanced. And I think understanding that just brings a lot of texture to, that world, that creation of the new world, both in its complete tragedies and horrors, and also its opportunities and sort of moments of new possibility. Like for centuries, it seemed like the Tlaxcalteca had been resisting the Aztec Empire for centuries in what was essentially a stalemate. And, suddenly these agents of chaos arrive and they're like, oh, what can we do with this? And what happens next is not
the
like
aliens
this
show up
inevitable.
and when the individual warring nations pick sides, right? To put it in
and
science
it's not
fiction
just like
terms.
this story, like inevitable triumph of superior technology or culture. It's like it's much more complicated and much more interesting, I think, and it really like gives a lot of texture to how our world got formed and where we could go with it next, I think.
Let me ask, how does that affect your view of colonialism overall? Because, of course, when we talk about colonialism here in the U.S., we are not brought up talking about how much it extracted from the countries upon which it operated. That is obscured from us in our history. And so we often, those of us who care about this, will tend to put a lot of emphasis on, hey, colonialism bad. Colonialism like ruined many, many places in the world. In fact, when you look at the entire world and all of its problems, you should look at it as a bunch of European nations went and extracted a bunch of wealth from other places and built themselves beautiful cities. I went to Amsterdam last year. I'm like looking around going, this is like the physicalized wealth of many other nations went to building this beautiful city, right? I'm looking at coffee beans from Java and whatever the fuck else, I'm getting the crops wrong, but you know what I mean, turned into stone and artwork and beautiful things. And that's a dynamic we have to understand about the whole world. And so we often say that to demonize colonialism, to say this was a bad economic system that hurt people, it was extractive. At the same time, you're saying, look, it's more complicated than that, right? That these are nations that had their own, or places that had their own histories, that had multiple groups, that had, to which the arrival of the colonial power was maybe a small part of the history, right? And that they have agency as well. So how does that, do those two things go together or complicate themselves for you? The degree to which we want to have a moral judgment of colonialism as a system, but holding that next to, hey, the people at that time in those places also had agency.
Yeah. No, I think my moral judgment is strong and negative of colonialism for sure, because I think, a lot of the decisions got made. But I think it's like really what it does for me is help me understand that there was a long period of time where things were still being negotiated. And,
Yeah.
It helps me break out of this sense that like, oh, it was over quickly and the way things turned out had to be that's how it had to be. And so like everyone is kind of passive in that story, including us living today, or especially us living today, who are just like, well, that was a shame, but there's really nothing anyone could have done about it. And there's certainly nothing we can do about it today. And like, for me, I think thinking of these colonial stories as more complex and far longer and involving far more, kind of stories of different communities that took very, a lot of different trajectories, just makes me feel like, okay, this is a story that continues today in a very real way. Like it's not something that ended.
Yes.
And I think that, as you say, like Amsterdam is, and a lot of European cities are like a manifestation of this wealth. I think about it, in a way that I worry makes me like extremely irritating. It's like when you think about how used we are, or how much we're used to like the availability of sugar and desserts. And, I watch the Great British Bake Off and I'm like, I wonder why they have these desserts. Like, I
wonder how all that baking became part of British culture, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I wonder where all that sugar came from to the point where these would seem like normal things to make. And, it's sort of, I sort of feel like it, I can't do anything without thinking about it now. And it is absolutely horrifying. But I think what it does is sort of like, for me, the thoughts that I hold in tension actually are more like, okay, this horrible force in the world, it didn't have to be this way. It hasn't ended. It's not over. This is still a very present thing shaping my life and the lives of everyone I've ever met. And also, we can't really go back. Like, we can't turn back the clock. And we can't say, we can say we wish this hadn't happened. We can say we know it shouldn't have happened. But, the tremendous damage and also, beautiful museums and buildings and wealth, like those things all got built. And you sort of have to start from where you are now in terms of thinking about how to move forward. And I think that for me, that's actually where the idea of our world as post-apocalyptic seems to me like a great opportunity, actually. Like it's never really worked. We're just clinging to this myth that this has to be this way because it's some kind of signal of progress. And yeah, it was all inevitable. There was nothing we could do then. There's nothing we can do now. I think those are kind of the biggest lies that have ever been told. And I think when you or I know when I've started to see kind of the cracks in that story and the ways that our world is suffering for the patterns and the the destruction that happened back then, it really makes me feel like, okay, like, well, things are about to really change now. Like I think we are at I think we are at the beginning of something new. And I think it makes me far less afraid to think of letting the old world go when I think of where it came from and what it truly is and how much better it could be.
Ooh, okay. Yes. Well, so I'm loving this. When you put today in its context as being built on many past apocalypses, past worlds that other people lived in, and their world was destroyed and became something new, became the world that we currently live in. That's happened multitudes of times. Well, one of the first things it does, it makes you less precious about the world we currently live in. Hey, you know what? Maybe things weren't so fucking hot right now a second ago, and maybe we could embrace there being something new to a certain extent. And then also when you have a view of the end of the previous world being caused by other people just like yourself and happening to other people just like yourself, right? What you're talking about, the story of colonialism, where there's people in that story who are doing very bad things on purpose. There are people in that story who are doing bad things on accident. There are people in that story who are doing good things, or things with the best of intentions, but they result in an outcome that maybe they wouldn't prefer. There's people who are victims and villains, certainly, but they're not supernatural forces. They're not like gods and demons and angels and they're all people, and all of them had agency. all of them created the new world together. You might ask yourself, am I one of the good ones or am I one of the bad ones? And you might make a choice to try to make a world that's a little bit better than you would have an option of making. But the main thing is you are not sitting there shedding a single tear for the world that went by, and neither was anybody else, right? You're an active participant. Is that sort of part of the point?
Yeah, I think we're all active participants. And I think a lot of the thing, I think what sort of makes colonialism stand apart for me in how long it's lasted, like based, compared to some of the other apocalypses in the book, is that it really precluded the kinds of recovery that we're able to see in other apocalypses, which really come out of like new communities forming, new ideas getting invented, like new adaptations to a new reality. And I think like in a lot of senses, colonialism, precluded those large scale adaptations and large scale kind of figuring out the best way, so these terrible things have happened, but, working together, we can sort of figure out what we want to leave behind, both from the apocalyptic experiences and from the world we lived in before, and kind of figure out how to move on together. That process really, it was able to happen on very small scales here and there, but that is not the process that led to the world that we live in. Colonial violence is the process that we're still, if colonialism was so successful, we wouldn't need to like continually reenact it and continually impose it with, violence around the world. And, it's not like a natural adaptation to a new reality, which I think is when you have the most successful recoveries from apocalypse, that's what people are able to do. And I think, we could go either way, like we could be entering a moment where the powers that be kind of like after the Black Death, like where we let them really limit our choices, or they, deprive us of the power to decide for ourselves and work together and really look around and what's happening and what we not only what we want to leave behind, but also what we want to create next. And I think, the most successful recoveries from apocalypses are communities that are able to do that together and really look forward into something new and different.
Folks, I've heard that BBLs are going out of style. Big, beautiful, load-bearing wallets, that is. I really love this ad copy. All that extra junk in the trunk of your wallet, hanging off your backside, making it difficult to sit down, well, it's a thing of the past. I know that personally, I hated sitting down and feeling like I was in a booster seat made of my own wallet, and that is why I switched to Ridge. Ridge wallets are modern and expertly made out of premium materials like aluminum, titanium, and carbon fiber. They don't just look sleek, they also have modern features that all wallets should have, like RFID blocking to protect yourself from digital pickpockets. And Ridge just brought their Ridge 2.0 to the table. They're 10% lighter, have improved cash straps, money clips, and the AirTag attachments, and the new designs are more beautiful than ever. On top of that, they're unique. There's over 50 different colors and styles to choose from, so it's something unique to you from the start, not just because of the damage your butt has inflicted on patent leather over the course of a couple years. Ridge aims to be the last wallet you'll ever have to buy, with a lifetime warranty to back it up. That way you can start telling your own tale of the wallet what once was before you made the switch to Ridge. And for a limited time, Ridge is having their huge Black Friday sale. Head to ridge.com to get up to 40% off your offer. This is by far the biggest discount they've given all year. That's ridge.com for up to 47% off your order during their biggest sale of the year. After you purchase, they will ask where you heard about them, and please support our show and tell them our show sent you. Well, they finally did it, folks. They killed the penny. Poor old Abe has been put out to pasture yet again, but this time for a better reason than, the first time it happened. No one wants to carry cash anymore. I mean, do you? I don't. Well, Cash App is simply the best way to zap money straight to your friends when you don't got those little copper coins to give them anymore. It's fast, it's safe, and it is so quick to get started, and it has zero hoops to jump through. And get this, Cash App just released a new status program for the way people actually spend called Cash App Green. It unlocks new ways for you to pay, get rewarded, and easily grow or manage your money on your terms. And now, when you spend at least $500 a month with the Cash App card or Cash App Pay, you earn green status, which unlocks benefits like up to $200 of free overdraft coverage, higher borrow limits, and custom personalized cashback offers every Friday at places you love to shop. Turn everyday spending into status with Cash App Green. Download Cash App today or visit cash.app/new to learn more about this and other great features launching now. And for a limited time, new Cash App customers can earn $10 if they use the code CashApp10 in their profile at signup and send $5 to a friend within 14 days. Terms apply. Cash App is a financial services platform, not a bank. Banking services provided by Cash App's bank partners. Prepaid debit cards issued by Sutton Bank. Member FDIC. Cash App Green overdraft coverage, borrow, cashback offers, and promotions provided by Cash App, a Block Incorporated brand. Visit cash.app/legal/podcast for full disclosures. Yeah, so I'm looking at, let's make this a little concrete and talk about how we might think differently about our present moment, please. Because, we're living through a moment where so many things that I care about or have cared about are going away. Are passing before my eyes. I used to work in television. I grew up watching television. I wanted to be on television. I got to be on television. Television doesn't exist anymore. It's no longer real. Now it's YouTube. That's where I am now because that's where things are, right? And I spend time mourning that. I'm like, I really missed that. I thought that was better in a lot of ways than YouTube. We don't need to get into it. I've talked about it in other episodes. Or I think about the wanton destruction that's being done to our system of government. I did an entire 6-episode Netflix show about many of the problems of government, but many of the good things as well. Many of the people who I had incredible respect for our weather science apparatus, for instance, like these incredible scientists who work in the public good. I met them. I'm like, these are some of the most civic-minded people I've ever met. This is a purely good thing on this earth in a world that needs more of them. And I developed a love for it. 80% of those people have now been fired with prejudice by the federal government. I think about, how much I love nature. I was brought up loving nature by my parents. How much of that, natural ecosystems are continuing to shrink. The biggest bill that ever would have protected the environment to some degree, the Inflation Reduction Act, has been just torn to shreds by the new government, et cetera. And so I could sit around and mourn those things, and maybe I should, because there are going to be some bad things that come from that. But I could also look back at all those systems and things that I'm mourning and saying, well, hey, it wasn't all great. You know what I mean? Commercial television, not perfect, right? Federal government hurt a lot of people, right? Did a lot of bad things. Not like our current systems of environmentalism were working that well. And I could say instead, well, now that all the sandcastles have been kicked down, maybe it's an opportunity to build some better ones. Maybe it's an opportunity to think about, hey, what kind of systems do I want built? And that folks who agree with me, we could do that collectively. Maybe, maybe if a whole bunch of people are getting kicked off their health insurance, tens of millions by the government, maybe that'll be an opportunity for us to come up with a better social health insurance plan, for example, in a couple of years after a lot of people die. Not saying it's a good thing, but that is the opportunity that comes out of such incredible destruction. Is it something like that?
Yeah, I think so. It's like, I think that these moments of apocalypse, which, we've talked about with colonialism, it was, really caused by human beings. Like, not all of them are. Like, obviously the plague was, experienced and as a literal act of God by the people who lived through it or didn't live through it, as the case may be. A lot of these apocalyptic forces are not really in our full control. Even something like climate change, which of course is caused by human activity. But, even if we stopped emitting CO2 into the atmosphere tomorrow, we've still locked in decades or centuries of pretty extreme climate changes already, including quite high sea level rise.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with that and how it is going to feel to live in that world. And so, I think mourning these past, what we're losing is really important. And, really thinking about what we're missing from what are we mourning exactly, and how can we carry that forward into new systems? And really thinking about like how, like these are the moments when everything starts to break apart. And I think that, you know, it just provides an incredible opening for new ideas. And, it makes things that previously seemed impossible are all suddenly possible. And I think that is not, it's not a pleasant thing to live through, even though I'm sort of giving it like a more optimistic spin. I mean, that's a feeling I vividly remember from March 2020, where it was like, oh, everything that we thought, like everything about the world I thought I was living in was just kind of made up and vanished overnight. And like
Yes.
that can happen. I didn't know that could happen. I didn't know how that would feel. And now I do. And I think that was, so scary to a lot of people that we've retreated from that experience and that kind of, opportunity or really demand from the universe that we like expand our imaginations as to what
Yes.
is possible for our lives and societies. But I think these moments come where you don't really get a choice anymore, and like that you only have your expanded imagination. And I do think that people in the past, I found it really heartening to see how people did reinvent things and did continue to go forward and did, and often it was really hard it was hard after. Like it's never easy. But I think when I think about the destruction of the federal government in the US, like it's sort of, it's kind of the culmination maybe of this sort of resource extraction, inequality, oppression, elite hierarchy mindset of where like one of colonialism, it sort of seems like, okay, we're reaching like the apotheosis of that
Yeah.
apocalypse and post-apocalypse, and seeing all of that break apart is absolutely horrifying. And yeah, it's certainly in kind of those cracks and those pieces, I don't think anyone at any point wishes for these experiences. But I think when people go through disasters, and you see this in the past archaeologically, you see this, just in newspapers in the present, like when people go through a disaster, we expect it to be, a pure tragedy, a pure, make people territorial, make people kind of out for themselves, uncooperative, more violent. And that is so rarely what happens. Like it only happens when resources are being artificially limited by some outside force or power, and when people are, over and over again, when people experience disaster, and I've had this experience myself after the earthquake in 2017 in Mexico City, and just watching the city come together to help each other.
Yeah.
It's like people ran towards the collapsed buildings, like anyone who could get there was running towards the places and the people who
Yep.
needed the most help. And I think that that's not part of how we're sort of taught to think about disasters and catastrophes and apocalypses, but it actually comes from, it's like a very, very deep human impulse and stretches like all the way back in our species histories. And I think that piece of ourselves and piece of our, past and our nature and who we are deserves like just as much credit and just as much inclusion in how we imagine kind of the worst experiences that we can go through. Like it doesn't turn us into monsters. It actually, in some senses, brings out the best in us.
Yeah, we've done it before. There have been previous times of great calamity that resulted in very positive changes in societies in the United States, the Great Depression into the FDR era, right? That's like one of those great swings that we can talk about as just an affirmatively good thing. It has dark sides like any part of American history, but where that, sort of falling apart of society led to a rapid rebuilding for the better and a regime change for the better. And I think maybe what those of us on the progressive left, or perhaps we might say the pro-human, pro-truth, pro-world improving part of our political culture, we could take the lesson that from what is happening, that more things are possible, not less. I mean, I would look at what, the forces of the destruction, the anti-human, right-wing, greed-based forces looked at COVID and said, oh, well, hey, if all of society is fake, then why don't we just win? Why don't we just do everything we ever wanted to do? Why don't we kick down every castle? Fuck it. Fuck it. Why not? And they turned out it worked. They just shut down the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They've wanted to do that for since 1970. They're destroying the Department of Education. My God, this is like stuff that they're the dog that caught the car. They're so happy, right? And people on the other side are going, oh my God, the world is over, right? Why not take the lesson? Hey, guess what? Ultimate victory for your side could be within your grasp as well. Like the fall of the old regime means that everything is on the table. Why are you weeping and crying and rending your garments when in fact the vacuum that you could fill is even larger? The degree to which the people are realizing, oh, the world of the 90s that we grew up in, that I grew up in, that, or whatever the previous regime is a lot, it's more fragile than we thought. Like, a lot of people are still sitting around going like, can you believe this is happening? Could you, what? And like the people who get past that and say, yeah, no, the world's fucking changing. Let's change it my way, right? Let's have agency. Let's not just be crying on the sidewalk, but let's do something about it. Those are going to be the people who create the new world, and you can be one of them, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. It's I think that there's a real, it's been quite depressing to me to sort of see the lack of imagination on the American left, at least, to just, when so much destruction is going on from the right wing, like it can seem like the best thing you can do and hope for is to defend the status quo. But, the status quo was not that great, and like the people's dissatisfaction with is what led to this rise in power of people who want to destroy it, in the most chaotic and horrible and unequal and just the apocalyptic way possible. But I think having a vision of not trying to, like, I think the worst, I think I just find the phrase "go back to normal," especially after COVID, to be like completely offensive and horrifying, and like almost the worst thing you can say. Like there is no back, there is no normal. Like we have to look forward, and I think we have to take big risks and big swings and big ideas, because this is the moment. These are the times when a society can and does really change. They have to. And how, if we want to participate in the direction of that change, we need to accept that that's where we are.
And that was the biggest mistake that, the Biden era made on the side of, anything left of center, was the desire, hey, well, let's just go back to normal. Let's just put American society back together. Genie was out of the bottle, turns out. Like it was a fake normalcy. Yes. In fact, we were still living in the Trump era, still living in the COVID era, still living in the era when, the capitalist systems are breaking down, where the stock market is hitting record highs, but people can't afford basic necessities. We're still living in the Gilded Age, and putting the guild back on doesn't, change the reality that we are careening towards. I don't know if it's depression, but we're careening towards something new. And that realizing that, oh my God, we can't just, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer didn't figure it out, but maybe the rest of us can. And the amount of imagination and opportunity that brings us could be a lot larger than we expect. I think all the time about the Ursula Le Guin quotation. I'm sure you know the one I'm about to say. I'm going to butcher it. I'm not going to remember it exactly, but it's, capitalism seems inevitable and unremovable, but at one point, so did the divine right of kings. That's the quote is something along those lines. And we talked about, how there have been apocalypses that affected the divine right of kings in the past, right? We don't believe in that anymore, or at least in far fewer places around the world. And the same could be one day true of the system that we live under.
It will be true one day.
It will be true. This is a bold prediction.
Well, eventually, I'm not sure that I'll live through it, but I think, a truth about societies is that they end, and that doesn't mean
Yeah.
that civilization ends. It doesn't mean it results in a dark age. It often results in something, more flexible, more creative, more equal, more interesting than what came before. Some of the examples in my book are like ancient, the fall of Old Kingdom Egypt. I mean, it goes way far back to almost the first kings in the world. Like they eventually, these systems that have organized themselves to seem inevitable have always come apart. And I think that, the more kind of unequal and hierarchical a society gets, the more vulnerable they get to these apocalyptic forces, because it just becomes very brittle and unable to adapt. And I think that was part of what we could see with COVID, just at least like a shadow, like a shadow of that experience, at least like of a system that we'd constructed to not be able to handle these shocks. And yet we know more and more shocks are going to be coming, and they're just going to get bigger and bigger and more shocking. And I think that that's, we're backing ourselves in, we've already backed ourselves into a really tough corner, and we will get out of it. I mean, I used to think that that there was a real chance that humans would go extinct.
Wow.
From anthropogenic climate change. I don't think that anymore. I think we will survive and we will make it through. But things are really going to change, and I think kind of leaning into that change and embracing that change, it's like resisting the change that gets you into real trouble, I think. And
Yeah.
sort of embracing the possibility, the all of the new possibilities and all of the new things you're able to create, and stepping into the new world instead of clinging to the old one is, I think it's going to be like a very powerful, the people who are able to do that are going to have a much more pleasant experience
Yeah.
over the course of their lives, and I think are going to be able to kind of enact much more power over the society that we have. This building the society that is going to come.
That is such a beautiful way to put it. And I'd love to end us there, but I just have one final thought I want your question on, which is, I want your answer to, which is that something distressing that I see young people, and I still consider myself a more or less young person. I'm still in the first half of my life, hopefully. But people who are younger than me have a fatalism about the world ending. I think about this, it's personified so much by Bo Burnham and his work Inside that he did during the pandemic, which of course is brilliant, but it has this fucking world weariness to it. He's got all these songs about the world ending. That's what they're about. And it's all gone. It's all past. Like it's so sad. And he's also got a song about how he's turning 30 in that. Like I'm turning 30. Like it's the end of some fucking, you're 30, man. You're a third of the way through your life. You're young. I watched that when I was like 39. I was like, stop complaining. Like you've got your life ahead of you. Right. And so that's how I feel a lot of times when I see, TikToks about, where like people who are 26 are doing nostalgia content, not just about how, oh, didn't you like the TV shows of the past? Isn't that fun to think about? But like, oh, life was better and things are bad now. And we're just not gonna, the world is getting so bad. And like this throwing up the hands and sort of like fainting onto a couch and giving up and I'm painting with a broad brush here, but I see that tone everywhere. And what do you think is causing it, and how do we shake people awake to their agency that like, my God, you are going to create the world of the future. So fucking do it,
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I wish I could just shake everyone into a new awareness. I mean, even me, it's really tough. And it's tough to feel like the world that you were promised and the rules that you were told to follow are not going to get you, have not gotten you the
That,
results that
and that's the
that they
disappointment, right?
said.
That people feel lied to. They feel
Yes.
lied to about they were told this is how the world is supposed to work, and they learned it's false. But here's the thing. Every generation learns that. Every generation, parents teach their kids the world is the way it is on purpose. And it was designed that way because things are good. And then you hit 25 and you're like, oh, fuck, it's all chaos and nonsense and everyone's a moron. We all have to learn that. And so we're all lied to and we have that moment. But I understand that pain.
Yeah, I do too. And it's, I think it is extremely painful. I think what helps me is when what we were talking about with colonialism, actually, it's like the lies are bigger than I ever imagined. Like the lie is everything. And getting angry about that and getting truly not just getting disappointed about what I'm supposedly missing out on, but getting angry that I was ever taught to want those things in the first place, that society was ever set up in the way it was, and it shouldn't have been, and it grows out of these horrible moments of destruction and oppression. I mean, that really makes me livid, and yeah, I think there's a lot of that anger and in this book of what would I have been able to what would I have been able to do or know if I had been told these true stories, and I think that getting in touch with not only the true stories but also how that makes you feel, and how what has been concealed from you. I think this is sounding a little conspiracy theory, but I do think that the lies of inevitability and progress have done extreme damage to the way that we think about ourselves and our effect on the natural and our literal effect on the natural world. And I think that there's just so many different ways to be human, so many different ways to have a society, and just kind of getting in touch with just a few of them in the book really made me feel like, wow, there's so many possibilities out there that nobody told me about, and actually people lied to me about and kept from me. And I think that feeling that kind of sense of betrayal actually can lead to some good places. If you are allow yourself to feel it. I think that one of the things, one of my takeaways from the whole COVID experience was especially US society is really bad at dealing with grief. And we really didn't take the time to fully mourn what we went through, grieve the people we lost, grieve the lives that we thought were possible, that were revealed to not be the lives that we're going to have next for whatever, myriad reasons caused by the pandemic. And, I think not being scared to, get in touch with those, to really feel those losses and to accept them and admit them and mourn them is sort of the first step in thinking about what comes next and what comes into the future. I don't think you can just jump to this kind of utopian vision of apocalypse without doing some going through the quite difficult emotional experience first. And so I think but again, these experiences are coming for us, and at a certain point, you don't really get a choice anymore. And I think that is very scary, but also, there will come a point when people will have to get off the couch and they have to make the new world. And, people have always done it. And I think that seeing ourselves as, the descendants of millions of people throughout history who have confronted, a very similar experience, even similar emotional experiences to what we're having now, and did figure out ways forward. I mean, I find that I used to feel very alone in this climate change moment. And, I think writing this book, not only I'm not sure that that it's quite right to say that it made me more hopeful, but it certainly made me feel less alone in what we're all going through and what is possible for us.
Yeah. Well, hope is the wrong word. I have started to say fuck hope because hope is like, I hope, you know, I'll sit around and like, oh, hope things get better. You know, I'm not going to do anything about it, but like maybe someone will come along and do something for me. You know, that was the Barack Obama approach. Oh, hope. Oh, okay. Oh, hopefully that guy will help. Well, he, you know, didn't do as much as we hoped, right? As opposed to, it's a passive word, as opposed to seeing yourself as part of history. And look, the new world is going to be created whether or not you get off the couch, right? So you might as well and be a part of it and make it a little bit better. You always have that opportunity. We are always creating the future, and we are living in a present that other people created in the past. And, you know, I think having that full picture of it, I don't, it's too reductive to say, oh, does it give you hope? Does it make you less apathetic? Does it make you less hopeless? I don't know. It gives you more power if you understand it fully in its fullness. The line of history behind you and ahead of you, with clarity, and you dispel all the lies, because the lies are designed to keep you helpless, you know.
Exactly.
And if you only get so far in dispelling them that you're just again feeling helpless on the couch, you haven't dispelled the lie all the way. You know, and so I really love your book because you're approaching this with such nuance and clarity, and you know, taking me through a next level where all those old emotions don't even apply, and I can just get busy creating and living, you know. And so I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. The name of the book is Apocalypse: How Catastrophe Transforms Our World and Can Forge New Futures. Did I get it right?
Yes.
You can get a copy, of course, at our special bookshop, factuallypod.com/books. And I hope you do. This would be fun to do as a next copy, as a next installment of our Patreon book club. Maybe I'll suggest to our community. Where else can people find you out there in the world, Lizzie?
Yeah, so the best way to follow my upcoming work is through my newsletter, which you can find at lizziewade.com.
And you're absolutely brilliant, and I hope that people follow you there. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much, Lizzie.
Thank you for having me. It's been delightful.
Thank you once again to Lizzie for coming on the show. If you want to buy a copy of her book, once again, head to factuallypod.com/books. Every book you purchase there will support not just this show, but your local bookstore as well. If you'd like to support the show directly, head to patreon.com/Adam Conover. $5 a month gets you every episode of the show ad-free for $15 a month. I will read your name in the credits of the show and put it in the credits of every single one of my video monologues. This week, we got some new supporters. I want to thank Jake. I want to support Callan, Hey Look a Distraction, Uber Elder, and Evaro Eggburger. If you want me to read your name or silly username at the end of every episode of the show, head to patreon.com/Adam Conover. We'd love to have you there. Once again, if you'd like to come see me on the road, head to adamconover.net for all those tickets and tour dates. I would love to come see you on the road. Of course, I want to thank my producers, Sam Radman and Tony Wilson, everybody here at HeadGum for making the show possible. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time on Factually.
That was a HeadGum podcast.